Welcome back. The Transport Minister expressing alarm over the findings of that Four Seas Adventures boat explosion this past summer that ended the life of an American wife and mother. JCN's Leah Cooper has the details.
The Port Department has been instructed to have every boat in Exuma inspected. This in order to bring the requisite regulations to the maritime industry. Transport Minister Renward Wells revealed as much, having skimmed through the report into that deadly boat accident in Exuma, 25 copies of which were to be distributed to cabinet ministers during their weekly meeting on Tuesday. In the report, the Bahamas Maritime Authority acknowledged that it was difficult identifying the precise cause of the June explosion because of the damage to the craft and the physical structure.
The fuel lines being used was not spec'd for gasoline, and if hoses are not spec'd, they dry rot, and gasoline by itself is not explosive. Gasoline from the pump goes off into the air and there's no problem. But if it is in a contained space, then it becomes a problem. And so where he had his fuel tanks encapsulated in those pontoon, we understand that could have been an issue as well, the overall structural design.
But this, he says, isn't done in the Bahamas. Rather, a number of people build boats for commercial purposes. An engineer by profession, here's what Minister Wells says he also finds somewhat disappointing.
In engineering, before you can actually live in a building, ride a vehicle, the design has to be done on paper. That design has to be approved on paper by either an electrical engineer, mechanical engineer, a structural engineer, a civil engineer, an aeronautical engineer for airplanes, or a naval architect in the case of boats. Should have inspected, been able to look at those drawings and say, this is a boat that we feel is safe.
Minister Wells intends to have an architect analyze these boats to ensure these designs are actually safe before ship and boat builders begin constructing. American Malika Jackson died as a result of the boating tragedy. Several others were injured. Reporting for JCN News, I'm Leah Cooper.
While adding to the discussion about the findings of the Four Seas boat explosion report is Press Secretary Anthony Newbold, who today stressed that the government is not to blame, as there are regulatory agencies responsible for ensuring certain things take place.
The maritime people did a really great job investigating what happened. And again, one of the first recommendations they made was, listen, all commercial watercraft presently operating or intending to operate in the Bahamas, all of them need to be inspected and registered. So again, it's another one of those situations that you wish would never happen, but it's just that the regulatory agencies have to do what they're mandated to do.
Meantime, the PS says there has been no talks of the government being sued as a result of the accident. The opposition sounds off on the resignation of another F&M member and the continued drag on the Grand Bahamas economy. With the details on some of the issues coming out of the Progressive Liberal Party's monthly press briefing, we turn now to a report from our Berthany McDermott.
Opposition leader Philip Davis today chiding the government for allegedly forcing Leonard Sands to resign as president of the Bahamas Contractors Association. Mr. Sands chalks up his decision to being very vocal over the ratio of foreigners to Bahamians employed at the Point Development in downtown Nassau. He claims that in turn, the minister responsible placed pressure on him to resign. Mr. Sands' decisions to do so comes hot on the heels of the resignation of former Bahamas Power and Light Chairman Darnell Osborne, following a very public headbutting with Works Minister Desmond Bannister. Mr. Osborne resigned from the F&M's Finance Committee. As far as Mr. Davis sees things, one thing is clear: the minister-led administration's trying to silence anyone who opposes it. The opposition leader is further convinced that the resignation sends a bad message to professional Bahamians and it is not a good way to empower them.
These two resignations also signals what is a clear road upon which the government has been embarked on from they were elected. And that is to silence voices of opposition, either through persecution or prosecution. I asked them to come clean on these resignations, because each of them have in it, each resignation comes on the heels of what each resignee says are political interference, and they should come clean to the payment.
The opposition leader is further convinced that the resignation sends a bad message to professional Bahamians, and it is not a good way to empower Bahamians. Another key talking point during the party's monthly press briefing this morning was the economic state of Grand Bahama, which its leader said is very distressing.
For many hundreds of Grand Bahamians, there are taxi drivers, tour bus drivers, housekeepers in the hotels, cooks, waiters, casino workers, and all those dependent on the tourism industry, things have just gotten worse, with no light at the end of the tunnel. You must remember that there is a multiplier effect when it comes to employment. When one single individual becomes unemployed, it has a traumatic effect on at least several more individuals.
Mr. Davis insists that despite what's being put out there, the reopening of the Grand Lucayan cannot alone boost Grand Bahama's economy.
Grand Bahama needs fresh investment. It needs airlift to an airport that is competitively affordable. It needs that cruise port in East Grand Bahama that we left in place, that was agreed to be built by Carnival Cruise Line. Our hopes must not be high that this hotel deal will restore the economy of Grand Bahama and lift the gloom that has settled over that island. But we know this, and we have pointed it out, that this is a fatally flawed deal.
The opposition reiterated the view that the Grand Lucayan acquisition is another bad deal like Oban Energies. It's then calling on the government to be transparent. Reporting for JCN News, I'm Berthany McDermott.
Health Minister Dr. Dwayne Sands is hoping a sit-down with senior doctors stave off threats to take a strike vote this week, a move that, if followed through, can have serious repercussions on the public health care system.
This current view of telemedicine is less land-based, hard.
The Consultant Physician Staff Association contends that there are economic and infrastructural issues that have long been outstanding, but the Public Hospitals Authority counters that it just cannot afford to address the doctors' financial concerns. Taking up the issue during its briefing this morning, the PLP leader charged that the minister can distract, deflect, and blame the PLP all he wants, but had national health insurance been left alone, it would have now begun to meet and solve some of the CPSA's challenges. Dr. Sands, on the other hand, says he finds the assertion that the F&M's to blame for the country's healthcare failing absolutely laughable. Meantime, the Prime Minister is expected to meet with the doctors. You're watching JCN News. Stay with us.
This segment of the news was brought to you by Alive.